David Stearns spoke publicly for the first time in a few weeks on Tuesday, and his comments leave a lot of intrigue for what's left for the Mets this offseason.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On the show today, we're going to talk a little bit about David Stearns as he met with the media on Tuesday. I'm going to break down some of his comments and what it could mean for the rest of the Mets offseason. The second segment, we'll do an update on Kyle Tucker and where the Mets currently are with playing the market and how this ultimately could finish off their offseason on a strong note, which is where we'll close off the show in the final segment. Is there a pathway for the Mets to really nail the final few weeks of this offseason to the point where fans aren't just okay with what's happened this offseason? They're actually on board and thrilled with the team the Mets will carry into spring training. We're going to go through it all, but first, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. Want to find some of my written work? You can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The playoffs are here. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. All right, so amid all of the buzz on Tuesday about the New York Mets and a reported offer for Kyle Tucker, David Stearns was throwing a little luncheon for reporters at Citi Field. And a lot of different outlets wrote their stories about Stearns' comments, and we will be reacting to a lot of these quotes on the show here. And I think the main thing that you can take from this luncheon, but from the comments that we can read here from Stearns, there's a clear-cut plan that this front office has. They're following through with their own vision of what they want the Mets to become. And while you might disagree with the offseason because you love Pete Alonso, just like I do, you want your head of baseball operations to follow his and his team's convictions and build the type of team that can be a sustainable winner. And that is what he talked about. He talked about the frustration, but also explained why the Mets are doing or have done what they have this offseason. He says, quote, "I certainly understand that there have been points of this offseason that are frustrating for our fan base." He says, "I hear it. I recognize it. I hear it from my friends and family at times. I'm also very convicted that what we are doing is the right thing for our franchise going forward to accomplish our goals of creating a consistent playoff team, a team that year after year is a true World Series contender, and ultimately a team that does what we're all here to do, which is to win a World Series. That's why we are doing all of this." And you might disagree with the Mets' methods of roster building, but they came into the offseason with what they felt was a clear deficiency, and that was their team's defense. They have gone about improving that with the addition of Marcus Semien and what they probably deem as addition by subtraction of Pete Alonso and Brendan Nimmo, two players who had bat-first profiles that were aging, and for Nimmo was on the books for 5 more years, and for Alonso, who would have had to been on the books for 5 more years. Moving off of those players to try to bring in more defensive-oriented fits to the roster and also to lean into a farm system that they really like. On that note, Stearns says, "We have a very good present-day Major League team that's going to get better before we get to opening day. So moves are going to be made." He's making that clear. He says, "I'm very convicted that what we're doing is the right thing for our franchise moving forward to accomplish our goals." I guess that's the same quote. I probably pulled that from 2 different stories. But he also was talking about the roster as a whole, and he says, "I look at the mix of truly elite talent on our Major League team, combined with young players already established at the Major League level that we feel are ready to take that next step, along with a very strong top level of our minor league system. We have this pretty unique combination that is an enviable place for any organization to be. Mets fans look at a team that collapsed in the second half, that lost plenty of their fan favorites, but particularly lost one of their best hitters in Pete Alonso and one of the best closers in the game in Edwin Diaz. And I think the sentiment is this team has gotten worse. David Stearns and the Mets front office look at their roster and they say, well, our rotation has a lot of depth and a lot of guys that can be much better. They still like Sean Manaea. They still believe in Kodai Senga being able to bounce back. And once again, David Stearns mentioned how he is in a much better place this offseason than he was in years past. Could that just be conjecture because the Mets still trade Kodai Senga? Who knows? But they're at least publicly making it seem like they're comfortable there. He also pumped up Christian Scott to the media as a guy that, when the Mets were calling him up in 2024, was one of the best pitching prospects in baseball, who they believe will make a meaningful impact on their big league rotation this year. And that's not even getting into a full year of Noel McLean, Brandon Sproat, Jonah Tong. There is a lot to like with that depth coming up. And there's also Carson Bench, who's going to get a chance to break camp. You have Jet Williams. You have Ryan Clifford, AJ Ewing. You have this farm system that has guys that could make a big league impact. And then you have the grouping of players that we've seen for the last couple of years that might be ready to turn a corner in Beatty, in Alvarez, in Vientos, maybe even Mauricio and Acuna. So there's so much talent that is in this organization. It's about finding the right pieces and putting them together the right way. And by clearing out the last core, you are moving on from an era of baseball that just wasn't good enough. David Stearns says, we are committed universally from ownership on down to ensure that the next 5 years of the Mets are better, that we win more games and meet the expectations, the lofty expectations that we all have for ourselves than what we did previously. What we've done previously has not been good enough. The fact that he mentions having the next 5 years being better than the last 5, remember, the last 5 years have been the first 5 years of the Steve Cohen era. And so you're now turning the page and trying a new combination. And that's why you move on from Nimmo, McNeil, Alonso, Diaz, because you believe that you can put a better total team in place that will be better defensively, that can still hit, that will pitch much better, that can have a chance to contend this year. They like a lot of the components of their team, but they also are not done. One of the things that David Stearns has been lauded for is his ability to read markets. And when you hear him say, about the roster that they're in a good place and they will get better before opening day, when they are so convicted in their process and how they can build this really strong team, it does feel like there is more moves to be made. And David Stearns was asked about if the heavy lifting for the team is over. He said, I don't think any type of lifting is over. I wouldn't take anything off the table. I think we are and will continue to be involved in talks at all ranges of free agency and the trade market. So the Mets have a lot that can still be done this offseason that can change their narrative further. But one thing that I have talked about before that I want to hammer home again, you want this front office to disregard your sentiment as a fan, no matter how much that seems counterintuitive. What I mean by that is, yes, as a Mets fan, I wanted Pete Alonso back. I wanted Edwin Diaz back. I didn't necessarily think that the Mets should move on, particularly from Jeff McNeil, from where the roster was at when they made that trade. And I wasn't even going into the offseason saying the Mets have to get off of Brandon Nimmo. As a fan, you are attached to these players. As a front office, you can't be. And if you believe that the first base position is not where you should be spending $155 million, especially for a subpar defensive first baseman, then you have to follow those convictions. And you know what? They might put you in position to sign Kyle Tucker a month and a half later. And that's where the Mets are currently at. They have an opportunity on their hands, which I talked about on yesterday's bonus edition of Locked On Mets. But I want to give you another update on where things stand with Kyle Tucker and how the Mets could pull an incredible rabbit out of their hat here as we are, mere weeks before everyone starts to report, at least all of the players who are going to play in the World Baseball Classic report to Mets camp on February 9th. It's less than a month from players showing up to Port St. Lucie, but there could still be a massive move or two that are made by the New York Mets. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode where every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action because right now, every NFL playoff game, FanDuel is offering users a profit boost pack that'll be waiting for you inside the app each game day. You'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to the bets you like most. So these are the boosts that you can use that rely on your own game day instincts, whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, coaching. These boosts give you more juice on the bets you already like instead of forcing you to bet something different. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You make your picks, you apply your profit boost, and you go after bigger payouts while the playoffs are rolling along. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 16,000 subscribers. Now, I did a show after The Athletic posted a story yesterday about the Mets' reported contract offer to Kyle Tucker, or the range that they were looking to sign Kyle Tucker to, which was a 3-year deal between $120 and $140 million. As I was recording that live stream, Robert Murray of Fansided came out with another report that said the Mets have a contract that is worth $50 million per season for Kyle Tucker. If you go back and you listen to the live stream, everything I was talking about based on the Athletic story still really did check out, even with Robert Murray's story, because I was talking on the show about the Mets incentivizing the first year of that deal where Kyle Tucker could make $50 million in year one and then opt out. Now, when you hear $50 million per, you think, man, it's crazy, but it very well could be a deferred contract. So it might not be quite that level. Both reports could be true. Robert Murray's report of $50 million per can be true, and the Athletic's report about $120 to $140 million could be true, because if you defer some money, a 3-year, $150 million deal could actually have a present-day value in that $120 to $140 million range. But what is evident based on all the reporting we learned on Tuesday is the New York Mets have been aggressive in their pursuit of Kyle Tucker. They've met with him multiple times now for different meetings, and they have submitted a very competitive 3-year offer with opt-outs, you would assume. I guess those haven't been 100% confirmed and reported, but everyone is connecting those dots, that the Mets would give Kyle Tucker an opportunity to retest his market next year after hopefully a big season with the Mets, where the qualifying offer is not attached to him, the CBA could be ratified, and he would once again be the best free agent on the market. But as I mentioned on that live stream, you're looking at a class next off season where Jazz Chisholm might be the best player available if it's not Kyle Tucker. You have Nico Horner, who I guess might be better if you like defense over offense at second base. So maybe you like Horner over Jazz. You have Randy Arozarena. Yeah, like George Springer, but I mean, what's he going to be at that point? 37 years old. You have Dalton Varsho. There's other guys, but there's not all-stars all over the place. There is not big bats available. I would think that Kyle Tucker would do even better in that market than the one that he was in this year. That included Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman and Cody Bellinger, and all those guys did not have qualifying offers attached. And so that helps all of them in the market. You're seeing right now, a couple of the guys that are left, they all got QOs attached. Tucker, you still have, I mean, Bellinger doesn't, but Tucker and Bichette certainly do. So I think, and also Framber Valdez and Ranger Suarez and Zach Gallen all have qualifying offers attached. So that definitely does hold back markets, and that is part of the pitch on why a 3-year deal can make sense. Now, I think where the Mets are at, the fact that you have gotten in and you have made your interest public, now it's time to get a deal done. And getting outbid by the Dodgers on a 3-year deal is not going to look good. You need to have the most competitive and the best structured 3-year deal, where the only reason that Kyle Tucker is not signing with you is because he's gotten a better long-term deal with the Blue Jays, or because ultimately he never wanted New York, but you did everything you could to get a deal done. That's where things stand here. The Mets have a golden opportunity on their hands to get a player that we never expected they would even be in the room with, honestly, at the start of this offseason. We never anticipated the Mets would be able to sign Kyle Tucker, and certainly not on a 3-year deal. But that is now what the Mets have in front of them. And this is a market that seems to be moving. There's been a lot of reporting. This could go down today, as you guys listen to this. This can go down later this week. It does feel like we might get a resolution soon, and it's just a matter of how far are the Blue Jays willing to go on their long-term deal? Can they convince Kyle Tucker to spend the rest of his career in Toronto? Or does Tucker opt for the short-term route? And if he does, for the Mets to pull it off and to grab Tucker when the Dodgers are in and when the Blue Jays are in, and these are the two teams that were in the World Series last year, that would be a massive boon to this franchise for the upcoming season, and even just the perception of the New York Mets off of the offseason that they've had. Again, I spoke about all of this on that live stream, but it's worth repeating. This is a really good opportunity for the Mets, and I understand the hesitation from some fans about the dollar amount and hesitation about the draft picks and international bonus pool money that you would be forfeiting by signing a qualifying offer tendered free agent. Look, if you're able to sign Tucker, then you don't have to trade for Jarren Duran, and what you would trade for Jarren Duran is going to cost a lot more in terms of prospect capital and proven prospect capital that you understand, right? It's a lot easier to project Jet Williams' career than to, look at, the second round pick. I can't remember the exact pick that you forfeit as a competitive balance tax team, but the pick that you'd forfeit or the bonus pool money that you try to spend in 2027, you can get around those things. And yes, the salary would be insane. He could make $50 million this season. The Mets might incentivize him and pay him $55 million for year one if they really want to get a deal done. If Steve Cohen's ready to write that check, then you do it. You do it, and you have the long-term flexibility open that Kyle Tucker's probably only with your team for a year or two, and that's fine because it's going to make you so much better, and you're getting the absolute prime of Kyle Tucker at 29 years old in 2026. Now, an interesting comment from Tim Britton, his story about David Stearns and The Athletic and what he had talked about today. He mentions that if Tucker lands elsewhere, he says, New York likes the trade market for outfielders and could bid aggressively for a frontline starter. So it seems like there is a pivot in place where if you can't sign Tucker and you're not really in on Bellinger, then you might up your efforts to sign a guy like Framber Valdez and maybe save your prospect capital or push that prospect capital away from Freddy Peralta and more towards the trade market. So I would think the first shoe to drop is probably Tucker. That really seems like that's where the Mets are focused right now. If they ended up missing out on Tucker, it doesn't mean they're definitely going to go full force on Jarren Duran, because they've also been connected this offseason to Luis Robert. They've been connected to Jake Myers of the Astros. They've been connected to Lars Nootbaar. Today they were connected again to Brenton Doyle, who had a bad season last year, but if he wasn't a Gold Glover, he was a finalist 2 years ago in center field. Really special athlete who, did he go 2020 a couple years ago, or was it even 30-30? I mean, he had a really great, and granted he was playing for Colorado, but his 2024 season, if memory serves, was very strong. He was a 4-win player, 23 homers, 30 stolen bases, a 764 OPS this past year. That OPS dropped by over 100 points, only had 15 homers and stole 18 bases. And he does not have a Gold Glove on his resume, but I do believe he was a finalist in 2024. So that's another option that the Mets are potentially interested in. Again, if they can't sign Tucker, they will probably devote their focus to the trade market to fill the outfield, and maybe they'll look into free agency for that frontline starting pitcher instead of making a trade for Framber. But the bottom line here is the Mets have some really premium options that are still on the table, and it gives them the opportunity here to finish off this offseason with the flurry, where all of a sudden, everybody who's been hating on David Stearns for the past, 6 weeks might start to come around to his line of thinking on where this team is and what they can be in 2026. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. How can the Mets finish off this offseason strong? Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now it's time to take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everyday Club. You can get Locked On Mets, no interruptions. You can get access to our exclusive Discord server. You can communicate with other Locked On Mets fans. You also get some other bonus perks like access to a merch shop. If you want to be a part of our Everyday Club, go to lockedonmets.supercast.com, or you can check the link in the episode description. Now, let's talk about how the Mets can finish off this offseason and make it a home run of an offseason. Obviously, Kyle Tucker is the first big move that this team can make and should make if they can. But really, I think what this comes down to is something that I've been outlining on this show for well over a month now, that this team is in position here to make a big splash in free agency and a blockbuster trade because they have such a good farm system and they do still have money to spend. And by waiting out the market, you might find that you get a really good deal, particularly in free agency, whether it is being able to pull off Kyle Tucker on a short-term deal, or maybe it's Framber Valdez on a short-term deal. If you can get a frontline starting pitcher or an all-star outfielder short-term, that's a big win for this franchise and what they're trying to do moving forward, which is not block an up-and-coming farm system that could ultimately produce multiple outfielders to play next to Juan Soto, and that has the pitching depth to potentially have all homegrown frontline starting pitching and not need free agency to boost the rotation long-term. What has to happen for the Mets to have an A-plus offseason, which I know feels far-fetched if you are pessimistic about where this team is, but it is still within their grasps. It is a combination of signing Kyle Tucker and trading for Freddy Peralta. That's plan A. Plan B, which is almost as good as plan A, you trade for Jarren Duran and you sign Framber Valdez. Those two combinations of moves fit into the resources the Mets are probably willing to spend and complete this team in a meaningful way. If you have the budget for one big splash, Kyle Tucker or Framber Valdez, those are the two free agents that make the most sense for the New York Mets. The more that you think about Cody Bellinger, he does not fit the Mets because of what he wants, which is a long-term deal. Doesn't seem like Cody Bellinger, after finishing off his last contract, which was the opt-out laden special, where he didn't perform on year one of that deal and had to perform in a new place in year two of that deal to test the market again instead of opting into the final year of his 3-year contract. He doesn't want to just go right back into one of those deals. And the Mets are not going to be the team that gives him the 7-year deal that he seeks. So I'm not going to completely write him off, but I am filing that under the bucket of very unlikely at this point. Kyle Tucker, though, could be open to this short-term deal because he hasn't taken one before, and he can still hit the market next year at 29 years old going into his age 30 season. So you can make one big signing. Either of those guys, Tucker or Framber, makes a lot of sense. If you sign Tucker and you just spent $50 million for the upcoming season and $150 million over 3 years, whatever it is, trading for Freddy Peralta all of a sudden becomes almost imperative for this rotation because you're not going to be able to sign Framber on top of Tucker. I just cannot see the Mets shelling out that much money at the very end of this offseason. I mean, you're adding probably $80 million to the payroll for the upcoming season, taxed at 110%. That's ridiculous to spend like that, even for Steve Cohen. But Freddy Peralta is only making $8 million. So you can then take this farm system that you've built, take two really good pieces or Brandon Sproat as the main piece and a couple of other ancillary pieces to build on a package, and you can get a deal done for Peralta. And if you make both of those moves, look at the team that you can have. Your lineup: Lindor, Soto, Tucker, Polanco, Vientos, Beatty, Alvarez, Simeon, Benj. I mean, where's the weak spot in that lineup? Maybe if Vientos or Beatty doesn't perform, same thing with Alvarez. Maybe Simeon's bat, but you know his glove's going to really help you. Maybe Carson Benj in his rookie season. But that is a really good lineup. And then your rotation would be Freddy Peralta, Nolan McLean, David Peterson, Clay Holmes, Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga as your 1 through 6. 1 through 8, assuming you traded Sproat to get Peralta, you still have Jonah Tong and Christian Scott for further depth. That's a deep rotation. That's a rotation that has plenty of upside. If Kodai Senga ends up being the guy we've seen in the past, and he's right when you're going into October, you could have a playoff rotation of Freddy Peralta, Nolan McLean, and Kodai Senga. And if Sean Manaea is right, he can be your 4. Clay Holmes or David Peterson has a good season, they could be your 4. Tong or Christian Scott, you have so many options. That rotation's legit. That lineup's legit. Your bullpen, you've already addressed this offseason by signing Devin Williams and Luke Weaver. They've picked up a bunch of guys on minor league deals. There might be a diamond in the rough or two that shows up to camp. You still have in-house your lefties, AJ Minter and Brooks Raley. You have Huascar Brazaban and Adbert Azale, who are a couple of good options. Your bullpen's not in terrible shape right now. They can use an arm or two, but that's another thing you can pick up at the 11th hour this offseason to complete this roster. If the Mets pull off a big signing and a blockbuster trade, they're sitting pretty. I was going to talk about Jarren Duran again today and do a Boston Red Sox show where, could the Mets and the Red Sox be each other's plan B? Maybe we'll revisit that after the Kyle Tucker sweepstakes come to an end if the Mets don't end up signing him. Ultimately, as I was prepping for the show, it felt like rehashing stuff we've already talked about with Jarren Duran, even though the Red Sox are different without Bregman and they need infield help. I can also make a case now that they shouldn't trade Jarren Duran because he's arguably their second or third best bat, and the first best might be Roman Anthony, who's going into his first full season. You have Wilson Contreras and then sort of Duran, because guys like Wilyer Abreu and Cedane Rafael have been inconsistent with the bat. Trevor Story, you can't really count on him repeating what he did last season. And, what he did last season was a lot of counting stats, but overall, it's not like he was this outstanding hitter for you. Marcelo Meyer still has to establish himself. Like, there's a lot of pieces that are question marks in that Red Sox lineup. To trade one of the few guys that you know is going to hit in Jarren Duran, I think it becomes a little less likely. But the Mets can also present an offer the Red Sox can't refuse if they miss out on Tucker to get Duran, or they could just sign Framber and make trades for lesser outfielders, and it wouldn't be quite as much of the home run slam dunk offseason for the New York Mets, but it still can be very solid when it's all said and done. But again, if you pull off the Tucker Peralta finish to the offseason or the Duran Framber, financially, they're both similar. The Tucker Peralta one's going to cost more because Tucker is going to cost more than Framber, but Peralta and Duran are both making a similar amount of money. So it does feel like the Mets right now are sitting in this position where there's a lot of different places where they could go all in, and they are reading the market along the way and trying to be opportunistic with which one they jump on first. And right now, it seems like the first real full-on pursuit is trying to pull off the Kyle Tucker signing. If that doesn't work, maybe they, as Tim Britton mentioned, ramp up their efforts to sign someone like Framber because they still want to spend in free agency, or maybe because of where the market's moving, they have to jump on Freddy Peralta first because things are happening there and they have to make sure that they don't miss out on the opportunity to trade for him. So maybe even if they don't have Tucker, they still trade for Peralta and spend in free agency in other ways. Who knows? The Mets have a few weeks left here, and they still have big holes. But I think what David Stearns made clear to the media is they like where they are at. They like what's still on the table to address this roster. I don't think they feel the pressure of, oh, spring training's coming. They have exhibited patience all off season because they feel like they are making moves that are best for the franchise, not just this year, but for the next 5 years, where this team can be a sustainable winner. And they are not going to pigeonhole themselves into a roster that they don't love because the fans have a bunch of Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz jerseys. As much as I love those guys, as much as I wanted them to come back, I am very curious where this goes. And there are some options on the board here that could really change the narrative. And so now it's up to Stearns in this front office, as well as Steve Cohen to a certain extent, of course, because he's got to give the ultimate sign off and write the checks. Now it's up to them to get the job done and put together a roster where we all look back and say, man, it ended up being a good offseason for the New York Mets. We'll see what they do. That's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. If we don't get any news, we are probably going to go back towards the episode I did yesterday's show and start focusing in on next season and some of the young players who can take leaps. So we'll do a show on Brett Beatty if this can be the year he finally puts it all together. But hopefully we get some Tucker news or other free agent news that we get to react to and the Mets make a splash. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.